Hello chess lovers, Suren here, and in this video I want to share with you a very exciting game played between two open source chess engines. On the white side is neural network based chess engine Leela Chess Zero, and Stockfish is on the black side. The game was played in round 65 at the Top Chess Engine Championship Season 18 Superfinal. Leela opened up with d4, to which Stockfish answered with knight f6, c4 e6, knight f3. This is a way of avoiding the Bogo-Indian defense. As you know, in here the normal Bogo-Indian move is knight c3, but in the game we see knight f3, with which white is preventing black from pinning the knight and damaging his queenside pawn structure. Bishop b4 check. Here white has two main options. In the game we see knight bd2, black castled kingside, a3, breaking up the pin as soon as possible. Bishop e7, e4, d5, e5, knight goes back on d7, bishop d3, c5, and h4. This is the last move of the Top Chess Engine Championship opening book, and from this move on, the engines are going to play on their own. Already white has created a very dangerous bishop takes h7 threat. This is called Greek gift, and black neutralized the threat by playing g6. I have to tell you that h6 is an alternative. g6 was met with an interesting looking castling kingside. After h4, white is moving away his rook from the h file, and all this looks very interesting, and white is actually sacrificing the pawn. But accepting the pawn sacrifice can allow white to open up the h file and create a nice attack. Once the knight and bishops are exchanged on the h4 square, white can play g3, king g2, rook h1. In the game 2, castling kingside, black answered with knight c6, and only after knight b3 black accepted the pawn sacrifice. In 2018, in a game played between Ding Liren and Ivan Saric, the latter proceeded with d takes c4 and then played c takes d4, relieving the tension in the center. But in our game, after knight b3, we see bishop takes h4, bishop h6, rook e8, rook e1, c takes d4, queen c2. At this point you have to be very careful. Knight takes d4 is not good, because after the exchange of knights on d4, black has this devastating bishop f2 sacrifice, after which queen h4 is coming. Let's go back. In our game 2, c takes d4, white answered with queen c2. White is not only preventing b6 because of the vulnerability of the knight on c6, and also f6, because that move can be met with bishop takes g6. Here we have d takes c4, bishop takes c4, knight b6, rook d1. Another interesting decision by Leela Chess Zero, with which he is conceding the bishop pair. The engine is inviting knight takes c4, but black decided to proceed with the development and played bishop d7, knight c5, rook c8, b4, strengthening the knight on c5. Well, if knight takes b7, then black can play queen c7, and if a move like knight d6, then knight takes e5, and this line actually leads to massive complications. In our game 2, rook c8, we see a more solid continuation, b4. Finally black captured on c4, queen takes c4. So white gave up that light squared bishop, but the most important thing is that this dark squared bishop is alive, which can allow white to exploit the weaknesses of the dark squares. From black side, having the second knight could allow in some cases to organize the defense, like black could put the knight on d7 and cover the f6 square. Here black played bishop e7, knight e4. As we can see, white is not interested in this pawn. For example, if here, then queen c7, and then black can play a5, and instead we see knight e4. And actually this is a very provocative move, with which white is inviting black to capture on b4, which was actually made. By the way, knight takes e5 is not good because of this queen takes d4 move. If knight f3 check, then g takes f3, and now there are two nasty threats black is losing. To knight e4, black answered with knight takes b4, And it was in here that Leela Chess Zero delivered a heavy blow and went for a queen sacrifice. A very well planned move, the consequences of which Stockfish failed to understand. Yes, this sacrifice shows that Leela's positional understanding is on a higher level. Quite possibly Stockfish had a huge jump in evaluation and already thought that he is winning. So the queen sacrifice was accepted, a takes b4 and f5. Well, at this point rook c4 is an alternative, trying to stick to this pawn, but even in this case white is winning. White can play knight f6 check, and then knight g5 threatening mate in 1 if queen e7, then rook d3 followed by rook h3, and again white has a devastating attack. In our game to a takes b4 we see f5, and anyways knight f6 check followed, king h8, rook takes d4, rook c7, rook d1. If we take a look at the position, white has only 2 knights against a queen and 2 pawns. Materially, of course, black is leading, but there are too many problems to solve in black's camp, and actually already at this point black's position is lost. Rook e7, b5, b6, king h2, rook b7. This is just a Python strategy with which white is totally dominating the position and is not allowing his opponent to make active moves. All Stockfish can do is to move around waiting for his death. Queen c8, rook d2. Of course you can't move the bishop away because of this rook d8 check, and the vulnerability of the 8th rank actually plays a huge role in this attack. Rook c7, rook d6, rook b7, rook d4. Leela is not hurrying and is first repeating the moves, trying to deviate his opponent from the right path. Here rook d4 was made, rook c7, f4. Gradually and steadily white is making a progress, and finally after rook b6 knight takes e6 followed. A heavy blow which is just blowing apart black's position. If bishop takes e6, then rook d8 is coming, black recaptured on e6 with the rook, and we have knight takes d7, king g8. Meanwhile black king is hurrying towards the f7 square, but there is just no way out. Rook d8 is on the board, queen c5 keeping an eye on f8, and this time we have knight takes h7. Right now white has a very dangerous knight g5 threat. For example, if queen takes b5 or I don't know, queen b4, then in both cases knight g5 followed by bishop f8 is a checkmate. In our game to knight takes h7, black answered with rook e8, and there comes e6 check. Rook takes e6, knight g5 check, king f6, rook f8 check, and finally at this point black gave up the queen. Otherwise, if we move like king e7, then rook f7 check can follow, followed by rook takes b7 with an easy win. In our game we see queen takes f8, bishop takes f8, rook c7. Well, if we move like rook e8, if you move away your rook from e6 square where it was hanging, then this time rook d6 check can follow and black king is getting checkmated. And actually black's position is totally paralyzed, you know. You can't even move away your second rook from the 7th rank because this time white rook can penetrate the 7th rank, and again white is winning. There are 2 mating threats actually, or even 3, you know. And for example, if rook takes f8, then knight h7 is winning. In our game to bishop takes f8, black answered with rook c7 and rook d4, rook b7, and again Leela is not hurrying, is making a gradual progress. Rook d3, rook b7, king h4, rook c7, king g3, rook c4. Well, if you keep on piddling around with your rook on the 7th rank, then even this can't help you. King h4 can be played, and then finally white can play knight takes e6, and yes, the game is over. I don't know, for example, king f7, rook c6, yes, just no way out. this is an easy win. In our game to king g3, black answered with rook c4. Interesting that Leela didn't go for that line after king h4. Finally, white rook is penetrating the 7th rank. Rook e3 check. Yeah, already at this point there were several mating threats. Rook e3 check was played, king f2. Rook takes f4 check, king takes e3. The knight is untouchable because of this bishop h6 check. In our game, black played rook a4, and there comes bishop e7 check, king e5, and finally after king f3 we see a resignation. Black has only 2 pawns against 2 pieces, and of course white's position is totally winning. For example, if move like rook c4, then rook d6 can follow, and black is even going to lose this pawn as well. That's why finally after king f3 we see resignation. A very deep and complex queen sacrifice by Leela Chess Zero, which demonstrates the engine's deep positional understanding. This one we can confidently call Leela's Immortal queen sacrifice, right? In the end, a chess puzzle for you where the task is to find the winning line for white. It's white to move, and I will wait for your answer in the comment section. Thanks for watching. Here are more suggestions for you. Feel free to check them out as well. I will see you in my next video. Take care.